Nathaniel, when we talk about the war in Ukraine, many people say that the worst thing that could happen would be that it would go nuclear. Someone would drop an atomic bomb. And I've heard you say before that something has already happened that is worse than that.
The worst thing, from my perspective, has already happened, is that Russia has taken Ukrainian children in a systematic way, and in many cases, they're adopting them into Russian families. For me, that is one of the great tragedies of this war.
And why? Why is it in Russia's interest to take the Ukrainian children?
That's a great question, and I don't pretend to know what's in Vladimir Putin's brain, nor do I want to, but I think there's three objectives from this campaign of child transfer. One is really propaganda. The main audience for the transport of these children is the Russian people. And Russia is trying to rebrand a failing invasion as a battle against purported Nazis, and that they are saving children from them.
So this is like domestic PR in a sense.
100%. And in our investigation, really the breakthrough was we discovered that mid-level Russian officials were taking selfies of themselves with the children, largely on buses while they were moving them. And it was from the Russian official PR propaganda that we began to break the case. If they had not been promoting it internally, we wouldn't have known the scale of child deportation.
So they are selling this as almost a humanitarian gesture, that they're taking these children and re-educating them, saving them from a conflict zone. Is it normal that children are taken from conflict zones during war, and what would normally happen to them?
That's a really important question. Under the Geneva Convention, we have a roadmap of what countries are supposed to do with children in harm's way during war. First thing is they're supposed to move them to a third-party country. That didn't happen here. Second, they're supposed to register them, ideally with the Red Cross. That has not happened here. Third, the kids are supposed to be able to call home to their parents or to their nation's government. That has not happened. And fourth and finally, there needs to be independent, neutral access from the Red Cross and the United Nations. None of that has happened. Basically, what Russia has done here is the opposite, the exact opposite of what they're required to do by law.
And Nathaniel, when we talk about children, are we talking teenagers, very young, babies?
Both.
Everything.
From our research, the youngest is 6 months of age as of last year. So now they're about a year and a half. The oldest, 17. And so a huge age range. And really, this is the most important thing I think I can communicate, is that there's 4 groups of kids. The first are those that are at the camps, and they're primarily from eastern Ukraine, Luhansk and Donetsk. The second group are highly vulnerable children that were taken from Ukrainian state institutions that were captured by Russia in the early phase of the invasion. The third group are those that were captured on the battlefield in places like Mariupol. And the fourth group are those that were fleeing Mariupol and were in what was called filtration camps with their family and were taken and separated from their parents.
And when you say camps, they're brought to camps. What are these camps like in Russia?
There are so many camps and so many different types of camps. So this network, and it is a network of facilities, stretches from the Black Sea to the Pacific, over 3,500 miles. Some of these camps are closer to Alaska and Japan than they are to Moscow in Ukraine. For some kids, those who are younger, they go to camps like Teddy Bear Camp. That's an actual name of the camp, is Teddy Bear Camp. And there they are singing Russian folk songs. They're not allowed to speak Ukrainian, and they are basically being indoctrinated with pro-Russian curriculum. Others, such as older boys, in one case in Chechnya at a camp called Mountain Key, are engaged in firearms training, military vehicle operations training, and so they are being trained to be soldiers. There are still other children that have gone to foster homes and have actually been adopted by Russian families.
And is the idea to take them to keep them in Russia or to send them back into Ukraine as pro-Russian citizens then?
It depends on the group. For what we'll call the camp kids, they were always intended to go home with the hope that they would be pro-Russian citizens as they grew up. What happened with that group is many went to summer camp and then did not come home last summer. We think about 10% of those who went to those camps did not return. For those who were from the institutions, which included orphans, included children who were in state guardianship, including children with physical and mental disabilities, those children are largely the ones being adopted. And so we're in a situation right now where we actually don't know how many children are there in all these different types of settings. Our number is about 6,000. That's what we've published. The Ukrainian number is 19,000. If you combine those together, because we think they're from two different groups, ours are the kids in the camps, theirs were the kids from state institutions primarily. That's about at least 25,000 children.
And you think of the children with disabilities and special needs and what their faith is or where they're ending up. Do you have any idea? Are they being put into special care facilities in Russia? Are they being put into, I think I heard you mention before, psychiatric hospitals? Or
initially, some of the children from the state institutions did go to places that are called family centers, and in some cases, psychiatric hospitals. Since then, it appears that some, we don't know how many, have actually moved into adopted families or foster settings. There are two acts prohibited during war by the Geneva Conventions as it relates to children, two big ones. You can't move them into your territory and you can't transfer them, meaning move them from one ethnic or national group to another through adoption. We know that both things have been happening, and that's why the International Criminal Court indicted President Putin and Maria Lvova-Belova, a senior official, for their treatment of children.
Did she adopt a child herself?
She did, a teenage boy, and she said 2 days after the Humanitarian Research Lab, our team at Yale's report was released, in a press conference with Putin, she said, "Now I know what it means to be the mother of a Donbass child."
I saw that remarkable piece of video from a television show in Russia of the young girl, maybe 13 years of age. It looked like in a stadium or on a big stage, speaking into the microphone. She's from Ukraine, thanking the Russian soldiers for rescuing her, and she went up and hugged them on live TV. From the perspective of the Russians, is it working, what they're trying to do?
Well, first, let's talk about that girl. Her name is Anya. Her mother was killed by an artillery shell in Mariupol. She was at a stadium in Moscow for what was called the Defense of the Fatherland Day celebration, and she was forced to read a statement against her will while sobbing, surrounded by about 10 to 12 other children from Mariupol, who were then pressured to hug Yuri, or call sign Angel, a soldier who was standing on stage that supposedly rescued them. Those are what we call the battlefield kids. And is it working? Putin is under indictment. Maria Lvova-Belova is under indictment. No decent country in the world will do business or negotiate with these people. And the level of pressure from, regardless of what individuals or governments think about the war, the level of moral pressure on Putin right now is at its height, and largely because of the children's issue. So is it working? If this is what success looks like, I don't want to see failure.
But in terms of the domestic PR target, do you think that people are buying it in Russia, that they are rescuing these children and saving them, and it is a great thing that Russia is doing for them?
There is widespread media in Russia that views the movement of the children, both for re-education and for adoption, as a humanitarian service. And the message from both social media and from state media is that they are saving these children. Well, the reality is they are committing a war crime and a crime against humanity.
From all of the research you've done, finally, and your experience in investigating other war crimes, what do you think is going to happen to these children? What's the future for them?
Well, I'll tell you what I hope the future isn't, and then I'll tell you what I hope the future is. Having worked to reunite children that were taken as toddlers in Guatemala during the 1980s and put into the American adoption system illegally. Those children who were reunited with their parents, those parents that were still alive, were in their 30s when they came home. They were 2 or 3 when they were taken. They never knew their parents, really. And DNA was required to be able to identify where they came from. I don't want to see that here. As I say over and over again, this is like a trauma, a car crash in an emergency room. We're in the golden hour right now. If we don't get these kids back soon, it's going to be decades. And that's what I hope the future isn't. Okay, here's what I hope the future is. And by future, I mean the next couple of months. I hope that Russia does what it should have done on day one, register the children. I hope Russia allows them to call home. I hope Russia allows the Red Cross to go visit them. And I hope, most importantly, that they are held to account for what they did, which is a crime.